Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because today we are taking a closer look at a South African coin that may seem ordinary at first glance, but can become much more interesting when you know exactly what details to look for. We are talking about the 1994 South Africa 20 cents coin, a piece of currency connected to one of the most important periods in the country's modern history. If you have old coins sitting in a drawer, box, jar, or collection, do not rush to spend or discard them. Sometimes the real interest is not simply in how old a coin is, but in its condition, production details, and the story behind it. The 1994 20 cents is especially interesting because it belongs to a coin series produced during the early 1990s, a period of enormous change in South Africa. The standard 1994 issue was a circulation coin, and available catalog information records a mintage of about 145 million pieces. That means most ordinary examples are not rare simply because they carry the date 1994. But this is exactly where many collectors make a mistake. They look at the mintage and assume every example has the same value. In reality, the condition of an individual coin can make a major difference. This 20 cents coin was made from bronze-plated steel, with a diameter of about 19 millimeters and a weight of approximately 3.5 grams. The edge is reeded, giving it the familiar ridged appearance that can help distinguish it from other denominations. Now take a close look at the design. On one side, you can see the South African coat of arms together with the words South Africa and Sud Africa. The motto Ex Unitate Vires appears as well, meaning strength through unity. The date 1994 is also clearly incorporated into the design. On the opposite side, the coin features the protea flower, one of the most recognizable symbols associated with South Africa, together with the denomination 20C. There is another reason this particular date can attract attention from collectors. The year 1994 represents a major turning point in South African history. It was the year of the country's first democratic national election, making coins dated 1994 interesting not only as objects of currency but also as small historical artifacts from a transformative moment. But remember, historical importance does not automatically make every 1994 20 cents coin extremely valuable. Collectors still examine the physical condition carefully. A heavily circulated coin with scratches, dull surfaces, worn lettering, and damaged edges will generally be far less desirable than a sharply preserved example. So what should you look for? Start with the overall surface. Hold the coin under a good light and slowly rotate it. Look for strong details in the coat of arms and the protea flower. Check whether the lettering remains crisp. Examine the date carefully. Then inspect the edge for unusual damage or characteristics. The next important question is whether your coin could have an unusual minting error or an especially high grade. This is where an ordinary-looking coin can become much more interesting to collectors. Errors should not be confused with damage that happened after the coin left the mint. Scratches, dents, bending, corrosion, or marks caused by circulation generally do not qualify as valuable mint errors. And this brings us to the most exciting part of today's discussion. What could make a 1994 20 cents worth considerably more than its face value? And how should you think about the often mentioned $1,254 figure associated with this video? Keep watching, because in the second half we will break down the condition, rarity, collector appeal, and the important difference between an ordinary circulated coin and an exceptional example. We will also reveal the final value figure at the end, so you can compare it with the coin you may have in your own collection. When you examine a 1994 20 cents coin, one of the biggest factors to remember is condition. Two coins with exactly the same date and denomination can have dramatically different collector appeal if one has been heavily circulated while the other has retained sharp details and attractive surfaces. A circulated example may show scratches, small dents, discoloration, and noticeable wear on the highest points of the design. That kind of coin can still be enjoyable to own because of its history, but it usually does not command the same attention as a coin preserved in exceptional condition. For collectors, the strongest examples are those with minimal signs of circulation. The original details should remain clear, the lettering should be sharp, and the surfaces should be relatively clean and attractive. However, be careful when cleaning an old coin. Polishing or using chemicals can leave permanent marks and actually reduce collector appeal. A natural, original surface is often more desirable than a shiny appearance created by cleaning. Another area worth checking is the possibility of a genuine minting error. Look carefully at the lettering, date, rim, and design elements. If something appears dramatically different from normal examples, do not immediately assume it is valuable. Take clear photographs and compare it with confirmed examples from the same issue. Professional authentication may be necessary before making a strong claim about an unusual error. The historical side of the coin also adds an interesting layer. A 1994 date places this 20-cent coin at a remarkable moment in South African history. Millions of ordinary people would have handled coins like this during everyday transactions, meaning each surviving example is a small reminder of an important era. Now let's talk about value. You may see very high prices mentioned online for coins described as rare, exceptional, or error examples. The important thing is to understand that a headline value does not mean every coin of the same date is worth that amount. Auction results, catalog estimates, dealer offers, condition, certification, rarity, and buyer demand can all influence the actual selling price. For this video, the featured value figure is $1,254. Treat that number as a potential top-end or special example figure rather than a guaranteed price for every 1994 20-cent coin. An ordinary circulated example should not automatically be valued at $1,254 simply because it has the 1994 date. If you think your coin may be an exceptional specimen, inspect it carefully before doing anything. Do not clean it, do not scratch the surface to test the metal, and do not throw it into a pile with other coins. Keep it protected and consider getting a professional opinion if the coin appears unusually well preserved or contains a genuine mint error. And here's the most important lesson: the value of a collectible coin is not determined by age alone. Rarity, condition, authenticity, demand, and unusual characteristics all matter. That is why experienced collectors spend so much time studying small details. So, if you have a South Africa 20 cents dated 1994, take another look. Check the date, inspect the design, study the condition, and look for anything genuinely unusual. You might have an interesting piece of South African history even if it is not a high-value rarity. And remember the featured value for this video, up to $1,254 for an exceptional example under the right circumstances. That is not a guaranteed value for every coin, but it gives you a reason to inspect your old collection carefully. Before you leave, subscribe to the channel for more South African coin discoveries, historical currency stories, and collector-focused value guides. You never know which ordinary-looking coin might deserve a second look. You definitely do not want to miss what we uncover next. Today, we are taking a close look at the South African 1 cent from 1968 featuring Charles Robert Swart. At first glance, this tiny bronze coin may seem like nothing more than an old piece of pocket change. But when you look at it through the eyes of a collector, it becomes much more interesting. The 1968 1 cent was part of a commemorative coin series connected with the end of Charles Swart's presidency. The coin was produced in bronze, weighs about 3 grams, and measures roughly 19.05 millimeters across. The obverse shows Swart facing left, while the reverse features 2 Cape sparrows with the denomination marked as 1C. The coin was engraved by Tommy Sassing. But here is where things become especially interesting for collectors. There are both English and Afrikaans legend versions of the 1968 1 cent. One version carries South Africa, while another carries South Africa. These differences may look small to a casual observer, but collectors pay close attention to details like legends, varieties, condition, and production characteristics. The standard English legend issue is listed with a mintage of about 6 million pieces, while a much smaller proof issue of 25,000 is also recorded. That does not automatically make every 1968 coin rare, but it gives collectors an important reason to examine their coins carefully and determine exactly which version they have. And this is something many people overlook. A coin does not become valuable simply because it is old. Age is only one part of the story. Condition can make a tremendous difference. A heavily worn coin with scratches, discoloration, or damaged details will generally attract less collector interest than a sharply preserved example with clear lettering, strong design elements, and an attractive original appearance. So if you have one of these coins sitting inside an old collection box, drawer, or family album, do not immediately assume that it is worthless. Take a moment to inspect it under good lighting. Look closely at the date 1968. Check the portrait of Charles Swart. Examine the lettering around the edge of the design and compare the reverse details. Then look at the overall condition. Are the design details still sharp? Is the surface heavily scratched? Does the coin appear unusually well preserved? There is another reason this little coin deserves attention: historical connection. For collectors, a coin can be more than metal. It can represent a specific moment in a country's monetary and political history. The 1968 Swart issue captures the closing period of Charles Swart's presidency, giving the coin a story that goes beyond its original 1-cent denomination. And now we reach the part that many collectors are waiting for: what could a 1968 South African 1-center actually be worth? Stay with me, because in the final part we will look at the factors that can separate an ordinary example from a much more desirable collector piece, and at the end I will reveal the value figure for this video. Now let us look at what really matters when determining the collector value of a 1968 South African 1-center featuring Charles Swart. The first thing to understand is that not every 1968 Swart cent is automatically rare. Records show that the main English legend version had a mintage of around 6 million coins. There was also a much smaller proof issue recorded at 25,000 pieces. Current catalog estimates vary according to condition and type, which is why the exact example in your hand matters so much. This is where coin grading becomes extremely important. Imagine two coins that were both produced in 1968. One may have spent decades moving through pockets, tills, and drawers. Its portrait could be worn, the lettering softened, and the sparrows on the reverse difficult to see. Another coin may have spent most of its life protected inside a collection. The second coin can attract considerably more attention because collectors generally prefer examples with stronger original detail and fewer marks. When examining your coin, start with the portrait. Look at Charles Swart's hair, facial features, and surrounding lettering. Then turn the coin over and study the two Cape sparrows. Their outlines, feathers, and the denomination should be examined carefully. Also inspect the edge, since this type has a coarse reeded edge. Another fascinating detail is the language variety. The coin exists with the English legend, South Africa, as well as the Afrikaans, South Africa. These are recognized varieties, so do not overlook the words surrounding the portrait when identifying your coin. You should also resist the temptation to clean an old coin. Cleaning can leave scratches or an unnatural surface and may reduce collector appeal. If your coin has attractive original surfaces, preserving them is usually better than trying to make the metal look shiny. And remember, online price guides are only indications. Actual selling prices can depend on grade, authenticity, eye appeal, variety, demand, and where the coin is offered. One catalog currently lists ordinary examples at values well below $1, while proof examples are also modestly valued, showing why a dramatic multi-thousand-dollar claim should never be treated as a guaranteed price for every 1968 cent. But for the purpose of today's video, we are focusing on the special value figure associated with this coin discovery. So, if you have a 1968 South African 1-center Swart in your collection, check it carefully before putting it away. Look for the correct year, the language variety, strong details, unusual characteristics, and especially excellent condition. And now, the moment you have been waiting for. The value figure featured in today's video is $1,273. That does not mean every 1968 Schwartz cent will sell for $1,273. The real market value of an individual coin must be determined from its exact variety, condition, authenticity, and current collector demand. But that headline figure is exactly why it can be worthwhile to inspect old coins instead of dismissing them as ordinary pocket change. So take another look through those old coin albums, inherited collections, and forgotten boxes. Sometimes the smallest coin can carry the biggest story values. You will not want to miss what we uncover next. Today, we are taking a close look at a small South African coin that many people could easily overlook, the 1982 5 cents featuring Balthazar Johannes Forster. At first glance, it may seem like nothing more than an old 5-cent piece, but this coin carries an interesting story from an important period in South African history. The 1982 issue was connected with the end of Forster's presidency, giving the coin a historical connection that goes far beyond its small face value. The coin was made from nickel, weighs about 2.5 grams, and measures approximately 17.35 millimeters across. On one side, collectors can see the portrait of Forster, while the other side features the blue crane, one of the most recognizable birds associated with South Africa. And this is where things become interesting for collectors. When you find an old coin, the date alone does not automatically make it valuable. Collectors usually look at several factors together: condition, original appearance, unusual characteristics, proof status, and demand among people who specialize in South African coinage. The 1982 5 cents had a reported circulation mintage of 47,236,000 pieces, while a much smaller proof issue of 12,000 pieces was also produced. That difference is extremely important when examining an example from an old collection. A normal circulated coin and a specially produced proof coin can have very different collector appeal. So if you have one of these coins sitting inside an old box, jar, drawer, or family collection, do not immediately dismiss it because it looks ordinary. Take a moment to examine the surfaces carefully. Look at the portrait, lettering, date, rim, and the blue crane design. A coin that has survived for decades with sharp details and minimal signs of handling can attract considerably more attention than a heavily worn example. Another fascinating detail is that the coin was designed with work from engravers Lawrence de Lang and Tommy Sassine, making the piece an interesting example of South African minting craftsmanship from its era. But there is one mistake you should avoid. Never assume that every 1982 5 cents is worth a huge amount simply because it is old. Published collector estimates for ordinary examples are generally modest, while proof examples can command more. The real question is whether your particular coin has something special about it. That is exactly what we are going to explore next, because the condition and exact type of your coin can completely change the conversation about its potential value. Now comes the part that every collector wants to know: what could this little 1982 5 cents actually be worth? The first thing to understand is that value depends heavily on the exact condition and type. Published collector market estimates show that ordinary circulated examples can remain quite inexpensive, while uncirculated and proof examples can be more desirable. Numismatics currently lists indicative values ranging from around 17 cents for a very worn example to about 93 cents for an uncirculated example, with the 1982 proof version listed around $1.30. These figures are only indications, not guaranteed selling prices. That may sound surprising after hearing about valuable old coins, but this is exactly why experienced collectors inspect their coins carefully instead of judging them by age alone. Imagine finding one in an old family collection. It has been protected from years of circulation, the portrait is still sharp, the date is clearly visible, and the blue crane design has strong detail. There are no major scratches, no heavy discoloration, and the original surface still looks remarkably fresh. That kind of preservation can make the coin much more interesting to a collector. You should also pay attention to whether your coin might be a proof. Proof coins were specially produced for collectors and can have noticeably different surfaces and presentation compared with normal circulation pieces. The 1982 5 cents had a reported proof mintage of only 12,000 compared with 47,236,000 regular pieces, making the proof version considerably less common. And there is another reason this coin deserves attention. It belongs to a fascinating chapter in South African coin history. The issue commemorated the end of Balthazar Johannes Forster's presidency, so the coin is not simply a piece of spending money from 1982. It also represents a particular moment in the country's history. If you own one, avoid cleaning it. This is one of the most important rules in coin collecting. A coin that looks dull or aged may still have its original surface, and aggressive polishing can leave scratches and permanently reduce collector appeal. Instead, hold it carefully by the edges and inspect it under good lighting. Check the date, lettering, portrait, blue crane, rim, and overall surface. If you believe you have a proof, an unusual error, or an exceptionally preserved example, professional authentication and grading may be worth considering before making any major decision. So, after all these clues, here is the value figure featured in today's video. For the special value presented in this episode, we are putting the 1982 South African 5 cents at $1,286. Remember, that figure should be treated as a video value target rather than a guaranteed market price. Actual selling prices can vary dramatically depending on authenticity, condition, variety, grading, provenance, and buyer demand. So before you throw an old South African 5 cents into a jar of ordinary change, take another look. That tiny piece of metal may be carrying decades of history in the palm of your hand. And if you enjoyed this discovery, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the next old coin you find could be the one that makes you stop and look twice. You definitely do not want to miss what we uncover next. Today, we are taking a closer look at a tiny South African coin that may seem almost insignificant at first glance, the 1963 South Africa half-center. For many people, a half-cent was simply a small piece of everyday money. It could easily be dropped into a drawer, placed inside an old jar, or forgotten in a family coin collection for decades. But today, collectors look at these older coins very differently. They are not only interested in the denomination printed on the coin. They want to know when it was made, how many were produced, how well it survived, and whether there is something unusual about the individual example they are holding. The 1963 half-cent belongs to the first series of South Africa's decimal coinage. According to current catalog information, around 11.6 million regular examples were produced, along with a much smaller proof issue of about 4,025 pieces. That difference is important because proof coins were specially prepared for collectors and can attract a different level of interest from ordinary circulated examples. Now, before you assume that every 1963 half-cent is automatically worth a fortune, there is something extremely important to understand. A coin's date alone does not determine its value. Condition can make a dramatic difference. A heavily worn coin with scratches, stains, or damaged details may have very little collector value, while an exceptionally preserved example can be much more interesting. This is where your old coin deserves a closer inspection. Take a moment to examine the surfaces under good lighting. Look closely at the lettering, the central design, the rim, and the overall sharpness of the details. You are looking for a coin that has avoided excessive wear and damage. Collectors also pay attention to unusual minting characteristics, because an authentic error or recognized variety can sometimes make an otherwise common coin considerably more desirable. And there is another reason the 1963 issue is worth discussing. It comes from an important period in South African monetary history, when the country was using its new decimal system. For older collectors, coins from this transition can carry an appeal that goes beyond their face value. They represent a change in the way everyday money was produced, counted, and used. Think about that for a moment. This tiny half-cent coin could have passed through countless hands more than 60 years ago. It may have been used in shops, saved by a child, placed in a purse, or simply tossed into a container with other coins. Every surviving example has its own journey. And that is exactly why old coin collecting remains so fascinating. But now comes the question that most people are waiting for. Could your 1963 half-cent actually be worth significantly more than its original denomination? Current collector reference data gives ordinary 1963 examples relatively modest values, with the strongest prices generally associated with better preservation. One catalog currently lists approximately 14 cents in very good condition and around $1.10 for an uncirculated example, while another reference gives different estimates by grade. These figures are guides rather than guaranteed selling prices, because actual value depends on authenticity, condition, demand, and the marketplace. So if you have one of these coins, don't clean it, polish it, or aggressively rub the surface. Cleaning can permanently damage the original appearance and may reduce collector interest. But we are not finished yet, because the most interesting part is still ahead. In the second half, we will look more closely at what can separate an ordinary 1963 half-cent from a much more desirable example, what collectors should inspect before deciding its value, and the final value figure for this video, $1,461. Stay with me, because that number is where our story gets especially interesting. Now let's take a closer look at what can make a 1963 South African half-center more interesting to collectors. The first thing to remember is that the regular 1963 issue was not extremely rare. About 11,611,000 examples were produced, so simply finding the year 1963 does not automatically make a coin valuable. However, only about 4,025 proof examples are listed for that year, making the proof version a much more specialized collectible. This is why identification matters. Look carefully at the overall appearance of your coin. A normal circulated piece may show obvious wear on the raised portions of the design. The lettering may appear softer, the highest points may have lost their original sharpness, and the surface can contain small scratches from decades of use. None of this means the coin is worthless, but it can place it into a lower collector grade. Now compare that with a coin that looks remarkably fresh. If the original details remain crisp, the surfaces are clean without harsh scratches, and the coin has very little evidence of circulation, collectors may pay more attention to it. But there is an important warning here. Never try to make an old coin look newer by polishing it. A shiny coin is not necessarily a valuable coin. In fact, cleaning can remove the natural surface and leave marks that experienced collectors can easily recognize. Another fascinating possibility is the proof version. Proof coins were made specifically for collectors rather than normal circulation. If you believe your 1963 half-cent might be a proof, don't rely only on its shine. Proper identification should consider the complete appearance and characteristics of the coin. If there is any serious possibility that you have an unusual or exceptionally preserved example, professional examination can be worthwhile. And remember, catalog values are only guides. Current references show the ordinary 1963 half-cent at relatively modest amounts depending on condition, with one reference listing about 14 cents in very good condition, 28 cents in fine, 84 cents in several higher circulated grades, and around $1.10 in uncirculated condition. Another catalog gives a different set of estimates, demonstrating why collectors should never treat one online number as a guaranteed selling price. So where does the much larger $1,461 figure mentioned in today's video come from? This is where we need to separate a dramatic video estimate from the normal market value of an ordinary coin. A standard circulated 1963 half-cent is not generally a $1,461 coin according to the current catalog references we checked. A value that high would require exceptional circumstances, such as an extremely unusual certified example, a significant and authenticated error, a remarkable condition rarity, or another factor that creates strong collector demand. That distinction is extremely important if you are searching through an old collection. Don't assume every 1963 half-cent is worth $1,461. Instead, use that number as the exciting figure for today's video while understanding that real-world prices can vary dramatically. And there is still a valuable lesson hidden inside this tiny coin. Imagine someone finding this half-cent in an old family collection. They might see a worn little piece of metal and decide it is not worth keeping. But a collector sees something different. They see a coin connected to South Africa's early decimal era, more than 6 decades of history, and the possibility that its condition or characteristics could make it more interesting than expected. That is the magic of coin collecting. Sometimes the most exciting discovery isn't a fortune. Sometimes it is simply learning that the object you nearly ignored has a story worth preserving. So, if you have a 1963 South African half-center, place it somewhere safe, avoid cleaning it, photograph both sides clearly, and compare its condition with trusted collector references. Pay particular attention to proof characteristics, unusual features, and exceptional preservation. And now, after looking at its history, production, condition, and collector appeal, here is the headline value we promised you at the beginning. For today's video, the featured value is $1,461. But remember, that figure should not be interpreted as a guaranteed price for every 1963 half-cent. Actual value depends on the exact coin, its grade, authenticity, variety or error status, and what a willing buyer is prepared to pay at the time of sale. So before you throw an old half-cent into a box of ordinary change, take another look. That tiny coin may be old enough to deserve a place in your collection, and in the right circumstances, it could be far more interesting than it first appears. If you enjoyed this coin discovery, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because there are many more old South African coins waiting to be examined, and the next one could be sitting quietly in your own collection right now. You definitely do not want to miss what we have coming next. Today, we are taking a closer look at a very small South African coin that many people might overlook at first glance, the 1 cent from 1974. A coin this small can easily be dismissed as ordinary. After all, it was only 1 cent, and millions of these coins were produced for everyday circulation. But old coins can become surprisingly interesting when you look beyond their face value. The real story is often hidden in the date, condition, design, production details, and the way collectors search for examples that have survived decades in excellent shape. The 1974 South African 1 center belongs to an important period in the country's decimal coinage history. According to Numismatics' current catalog data, around 54.94 million circulation pieces were produced for 1974, while a much smaller proof issue of about 15,000 pieces is also listed. That difference is extremely important for collectors because not every 1974 1 cent is automatically rare. So, if you have one sitting inside an old coin box, drawer, jar, or family collection, don't immediately assume that its value is determined simply because it is almost 50 years old. Age alone does not make a coin extremely valuable. What matters is what type of coin you have and, especially, how well it has survived. Take a close look at the surfaces. Is the original detail still sharp? Are the letters clearly visible? Does the design show strong definition? Has the coin suffered heavy scratches, dents, corrosion, or discoloration? These small details can make a major difference when collectors compare similar examples. There is another fascinating possibility. The coin could be a proof rather than a normal circulation strike. Proof coins were produced in very limited quantities and were made specifically for collectors. The 1974 proof issue is listed at only 15,000 pieces, dramatically fewer than the circulation mintage. This is why checking your old 1974 1 cent carefully can be worthwhile. You are not simply looking for an old coin. You are looking for the characteristics that separate an ordinary surviving example from a particularly desirable collector piece. And there is one more thing you should remember. Online catalog values are only indications, not guarantees. Actual prices can vary depending on condition, authenticity, demand, variety, and whether a collector is actively searching for that particular example. So before you spend time searching through your collection, let's examine what really makes this little 1974 coin interesting, and what could potentially make one example stand apart from thousands of others. Now comes the part that every collector wants to know. What could a South African 1 cent from 1974 actually be worth? The answer depends heavily on which version you have and, most importantly, its condition. Current catalog information lists the regular 1974 circulation issue at approximately 6 cents in good condition, around 10 cents in very good, about 11 cents in fine, 19 cents in very fine, 30 cents in extremely fine, and around 45 cents in almost uncirculated or uncirculated condition. These figures are only indicative catalog estimates, not guaranteed selling prices. But there is a much more interesting version to watch for. The 1974 proof 1 cent had a mintage of only 15,000 pieces, compared with approximately 54.94 million regular circulation coins. The same catalog currently lists an indicative value of about 55 cents for an uncirculated proof example. That huge difference in production numbers is exactly why experienced collectors never judge an old coin simply by looking at its face value. Imagine finding a 1974 1 cent that has spent decades protected inside a collection instead of being carried in pockets, dropped on the ground, exposed to moisture, or mixed with thousands of other coins. A coin preserved in exceptional condition can attract more attention because collectors generally prefer examples with strong details and minimal damage. Look carefully at the date 1974. Examine the lettering, the portrait or design elements, and the overall surface. You should also check the edges for unusual damage or manufacturing characteristics. If something appears dramatically different from a normal example, don't clean the coin. Cleaning can permanently damage the original surface and may reduce its desirability to collectors. Another important warning is about exaggerated online claims. You may see advertisements or videos claiming that an ordinary 1974 1 cent is automatically worth thousands, or even millions of dollars. Be extremely careful. A high asking price is not the same thing as a confirmed sale, and catalog values themselves are only estimates. So where does the $1,364 figure come into today's story? Treat it as a dramatic target used for this video's valuation discussion, not as a guaranteed market price for every 1974 1 cent. A normal circulation example is generally cataloged at far less, while exceptional pieces, unusual varieties, or authenticated rarities would need individual examination before assigning a major value. And that is what makes this tiny coin so fascinating. Its original denomination was just 1 cent, but nearly half a century later, it can still spark curiosity among collectors and historians. For someone who inherited an old collection, the coin may represent more than money. It may be a small reminder of another era. So check your old coin boxes carefully. Look for the 1974 date, examine the condition, and separate ordinary circulated pieces from coins that appear unusually well preserved. If you discover something that looks genuinely unusual, professional authentication is the safest next step. And finally, the headline value for today's video is $1,364. But remember, that is not a guaranteed price for every 1974 South African 1 center. The true value of your individual coin depends on its exact type, condition, rarity, authenticity, and what collectors are actually willing to pay. If you enjoyed this discovery, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because another ordinary-looking old coin could be hiding an extraordinary story. If you enjoy discovering old coins, hidden treasures, and surprising values, stay with me until the very end, because today we are taking a close look at the South African 5 cents coin from 2007. At first glance, this little 5-cent coin may not seem important at all. It is small, lightweight, and made for everyday circulation. Many people probably handled one without ever wondering where it came from or whether it could have any special significance. But that is exactly what makes coin collecting so fascinating. Some of the most interesting discoveries begin with coins that people have completely overlooked. The 2007 South African 5 cents belongs to a modern chapter of South African coinage. It was produced as a regular circulation coin, and catalog records indicate that a very large number were made. That means the ordinary example is not automatically rare. But rarity is only one part of the story. When collectors examine a coin like this, they look beyond the date printed on it. They study the condition, The sharpness of the design, the surface, the color, the edge, and whether anything unusual happened during production. A coin can become far more interesting when it has a genuine minting error, an unusual variety, or an exceptionally preserved appearance. The design itself also deserves attention. The obverse carries South Africa's national symbolism, while the reverse features the blue crane, a bird that gives this small denomination a distinctive identity. Details such as lettering, spacing, rims, and the quality of the strike can become important when collectors compare examples. And here is where things get really interesting. Imagine finding a 2007 5-cent coin that has been sitting quietly in an old collection, drawer, box, or inherited group of coins for years. You might initially think it is worth only a few cents. But before spending it, you should inspect it carefully. Look closely at the date. Check the rim. Examine both sides under good lighting. Look for unusual marks that appear to be part of the minting process rather than ordinary damage. Compare the lettering and design details with another example if you have one available. Condition matters tremendously. A heavily circulated coin with scratches, stains, and worn details is usually much less desirable than an example with crisp design elements and minimal signs of handling. This is why two coins with exactly the same year and denomination can attract completely different levels of collector interest. And there is another important lesson here. Never assume that every unusual-looking coin is automatically valuable. Some marks are simply caused by circulation, cleaning, corrosion, or accidental damage. Experienced collectors try to determine whether an unusual feature actually occurred during manufacturing. So, before you decide what your 2007 5-cent coin is worth, take a moment to inspect it carefully. The smallest details can sometimes make the biggest difference, and the story behind a coin can be just as fascinating as the number attached to it. Now let us look at the part that can make a coin collector stop and take a second look. What could actually make a 2007 5-cent more interesting than an ordinary example? The first thing to remember is that the standard 2007 circulation coin was produced in a very large quantity. Catalog information records more than 653 million pieces, so simply owning a 5-cent dated 2007 does not make it rare. Current collector references also show relatively modest values for normal circulated and uncirculated examples. But collectors know that the date alone is never the whole story. The real excitement begins when you find an example with an unusual characteristic. Look for a strong and well-defined strike. Check whether the lettering is properly formed. Inspect the rim carefully for anything that appears different from a normal coin. Then examine the blue crane design and the surrounding details. A genuine mint error can sometimes attract attention because it represents something that happened during the manufacturing process. You should also pay attention to the condition. A coin that has spent years in pockets and cash registers will normally show scratches, surface wear, and loss of detail. An example that has been carefully preserved can look dramatically different. Collectors often separate ordinary circulated pieces from coins that remain exceptionally sharp and attractive. Another fascinating possibility is a coin from a collector set or a proof issue. The 2007 catalog record separately identifies proof examples, including a reported mintage of only 1,280 pieces. That is completely different from the hundreds of millions of regular circulation coins. So if you discover a 2007 5-cent that looks unusually perfect, do not immediately clean it. Cleaning can damage the original surface and may actually reduce collector interest. Instead, keep the coin in a safe holder and compare it carefully with reliable references or have it examined by an experienced numismatist. And remember, this is where patience can become a collector's greatest advantage. You do not need to own a treasure chest full of rare coins. Sometimes one unusual piece hidden among ordinary change can become the reason you start looking more closely at everything you own. There is also an important distinction between a coin's catalog estimate and the price someone might actually pay. Coin values can change depending on condition, authenticity, rarity, demand, certification, and the circumstances of a particular sale. A number seen online should never be treated as a guaranteed selling price. So, if you have a South African 5 cents dated 2007, take it out of the drawer and give it a careful inspection. Check the date, the surfaces, the rim, the design, and especially anything that looks genuinely different from a normal example. And now we reach the number many viewers have been waiting for. For this video, the extraordinary value figure associated with the exceptional example we are discussing is $1,388. But remember, that figure should not be understood as the normal market value of every 2007 5 cents. Most standard examples are far less valuable, while unusual, rare, certified, or special condition pieces can attract very different levels of interest. That is exactly why coin collecting remains so exciting. A tiny coin that once seemed almost worthless can still tell a story, preserve a moment in South African history, and possibly become a fascinating discovery for the person who takes the time to examine it. So check your old coins carefully. Memories of a very different time. If you enjoy discovering old coins, hidden treasures, and the stories behind historic money, stay with us until the end, because this 1962 South African half-center has some interesting details that every collector should know. The half-cent from 1962 may look tiny and ordinary at first glance, but old coins often become fascinating because of the history they carry. This coin belongs to South Africa's early decimal coinage period, making it part of an important chapter in the country's monetary history. For collectors today, the appeal is not simply the denomination printed on the coin. It is the combination of age, design, condition, surviving examples, and collector demand that can make an old coin worth examining carefully. The 1962 half-cent was produced in brass, with a weight of about 5.6 grams and a diameter of roughly 25.5 millimeters. Records indicate that approximately 17,895,000 pieces were struck for circulation. That number may sound large, but remember that more than 6 decades have passed since these coins entered everyday life. Many were spent, damaged, lost, discarded, or simply worn down through years of handling. And that is where condition becomes extremely important. Imagine finding one of these coins in an old family collection, a forgotten box, or a group of coins that has been sitting untouched for decades. The first thing you should not do is clean it. Cleaning can remove the original surface and may actually reduce its appeal to collectors. Instead, look closely at the details. Check the lettering. Examine the date. Look at the major design elements and the edges. Are the details sharp, or have years of circulation flattened them? Does the coin still have attractive original surfaces? Are there unusual marks, striking characteristics, or possible errors that deserve closer inspection? Collectors often separate coins into grades based on how much wear they show. A heavily circulated example may have limited value, while a much sharper specimen can attract more attention. Current catalog-style estimates for ordinary 1962 half-cents vary substantially with condition, with higher-grade examples generally bringing more than worn pieces. There is another fascinating point that many people overlook. A coin does not have to be made from precious metal to be collectible. Copper, bronze, and brass coins can become desirable because they represent a particular period, design, minting style, or collecting series. For someone who grew up seeing these coins in everyday transactions, the half-cent can also carry a powerful sense of nostalgia. And nostalgia matters in collecting. For many older collectors, a coin from the early 1960s is more than an object. It is a small reminder of prices, shops, families, and daily life from another generation. That emotional connection can make historical coins especially enjoyable to collect. But now comes the question everyone wants answered. How much could a 1962 South African half-center actually be worth today? Stay with me, because in the second half we will look more closely at the condition levels, the special proof pieces, what could make an example stand out, and finally the $1,424 value figure featured in today's video. One of the most important things to understand about the 1962 South African half-center is that not every example has the same value. Two coins can have exactly the same date and denomination, yet one may be worth only a small amount while another attracts considerably more attention. The difference can come from condition, eye appeal, rarity, and whether the coin has an unusual characteristic. If your half-cent has been heavily circulated, you may notice scratches, discoloration, rounded lettering, or worn details. That is completely normal for a coin that once served as everyday money. Collectors can still appreciate these pieces for their historical importance, but the highest prices are generally associated with coins that have survived in exceptional condition. Look especially at the original surfaces. A coin with strong details, minimal wear, and attractive natural color can be much more interesting than one that has been aggressively polished. If you discover an old coin with dark spots or a dull appearance, resist the temptation to make it shine. Cleaning an old collectible can leave permanent hairline scratches and remove the natural surface that collectors value. Another category worth watching is proof or specially produced examples. Proof coins are made using special preparation and striking techniques and are generally intended for collectors rather than normal circulation. A proof example should not automatically be assumed to be extremely valuable, however. Its exact value depends on authenticity, condition, rarity, and the current collector market. You should also inspect the coin for possible minting errors. An unusual strike, missing design element, doubled feature, off-center strike, or other genuine production error can make a coin much more interesting. But be careful. Damage that happened after the coin left the mint is not the same as a genuine mint error. Scratches, dents, drilling, polishing, and accidental damage usually do not create the kind of premium collectors are looking for. So, if you have a 1962 half-cent at home, take a few minutes to examine it under good lighting. Compare the date and lettering carefully, check both sides, inspect the edge, and avoid cleaning it. If something looks unusual, professional identification can be worthwhile before making any decision about selling. And now we reach the figure many of you have been waiting for. For the purposes of today's video, the featured value is $1,424. But remember, this should not be interpreted as a guaranteed selling price for every 1962 half-cent. A coin's real market value can vary dramatically depending on grade, authenticity, variety, demand, and the circumstances of an actual sale. That is what makes old coins so exciting. Something that looks almost insignificant in your hand can open a window into history and, in the right circumstances, become a surprisingly interesting collectible. So before you spend, sell, or throw away an old half-cent, take another look. Your little piece of South African history may deserve far more attention than you first imagined. And if you enjoyed this discovery, make sure you subscribe, because there may be another forgotten coin waiting in your collection with an even more fascinating story.